All right, the record is in progress. We are live on another episode of Direct with Dr. Couch, and today we got Trey with us. Trey, I have been following you online for some time, um, but we've not met in person. We've not been formally introduced. I've just been following you from afar on Instagram. I found you on TikTok today. We're newer to TikTok, but for those of
Nice.
you that don't know Trey, we have with us today Trey Waters, PharmD, who was born and raised in Bristol, Virginia. Trey started working at pharmacy tech at age 15, earned his doctor of pharmacy degree by age 23. Over the past 2 decades, he's owned and operated 20 plus independent pharmacies across the country, specializing in both traditional dispensing and cutting edge compounding. And I've told you, Trey, I saw this article that you had shared about PBMs, pharmacy benefit manager. And I think that this is a very convoluted topic, and we're here to talk about it kind of in the nuts and bolts on the ground. And I've got some questions, but let's get into it. Question number one: what is a pharmacy benefit manager, aka a PBM? Can we define it?
Yeah, let's try to do that. First of all, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here with you. I've also followed your path on social media, so maybe we'll meet live one day. So PBM, they go in and help companies negotiate drug pricing. So as the name says, pharmacy benefit manager. So uh, a lot of these large corporations, there's a lot of moving parts in healthcare. They purposefully try to make it way more difficult than what it is. And so they say, well, these prices they're going to get out of hand if you don't let us manage these prices for you. And so that's what they do. They go in and manage a company's health portfolio.
So when you say company, when you say the PBM is there to manage expenses for the company, what company are you talking about? When we're using,
Well, well, let's be literal. So let's say, so I have a lot of friends that work for UPS, right?
okay,
UPS is forced to go to CVS Caremark because they get a better copay. Their insurance works at CVS drugstores. So CVS Caremark would be one of the PBMs, so they would go in and they would work with UPS and they'll say, you have tens of thousands of employees. I'm sure it's costing you, you know, X number of dollars. We're willing to come in. We're happy to come in and help you save a ton of money. So it'd be a company like that. It might be the North Carolina school system. Lots of government programs, PBMs, help with Medicare Part D programs, Medicaid programs.
well, this is already super helpful because if we're talking about the PBM, and then I had the question about what do you mean by company, and you very clearly listed like what we consider an employer,
Right,
right? That is providing benefits for their employees underneath here, and the PBM is supposed to manage their drug expenses as a benefit.
right,
But what's interesting is when you said the word company, my brain went to insurance company. So now where would we place insurance company in relation to these two distinct entities? The employer providing the benefits, a pharmacy benefit manager saying we can save you some money. Where would we place insurance companies in that relationship?
yeah. So we were to draw it on a whiteboard. It would be the employer or the government, and then the plan. So whichever insurance plan they have. And then on top of that would be the PBM. Okay. So the PBM would manage that plan on behalf of the employer or the government.
Sure. So less of a direct relationship in that sense to the PBM and the company. The insurance
Correct.
company is the intermediary there. They're buying insurance plans, and as a result, the pharmacy benefit manager is now accessible to them in order to improve their costs, let's
That's
say.
right. That's the
Okay.
way I understand it.
Sure.
That's the way I understand it.
Gosh, there's so many places we could take that. But so how is that different, should we say, than when people say, I take my insurance card to the pharmacy to fill my prescription? How is the pharmacy benefit manager being involved in this hierarchy? How is that different than, let's just say, the insurance is involved in that transaction? Because there's obviously a subtle difference. And obviously, the PBMs are not a how old is this PBM structure? How old is this invention?
They've probably been around for 50 plus years. They've
Okay.
probably really had their tentacles in healthcare for maybe the last couple decades, that it's really gotten out of hand. So like with vertical integration, we can go down a lot of different paths here. So when a person comes in, are they and they present their card, obviously it's going to be an insurance card. Um, but there's by and large there's only three PBMs, right? So there's Express Scripts, there's Optum,
Optum.
and there's CVS Caremark. So they control 80% of the market. So they're creating the formularies. So the other key here, we said we've got the employer, then we've got the plan, and then we've got the PBM. Over here's big pharma, right? And so big pharma, they've done research and development. They're trying to get their drugs on the market. They're trying to get their drugs in the market and create market share because they want to get paid back for their R&D. So they're going to negotiate with the PBM so that their drug can be put on a formulary. They're also going to pay the PBM to do that. So
These
they
rebates.
are,
Like if people look this up, is that what we're talking about when we say rebates? Like
of
the
course,
big pharma is going
absolutely.
to pay the PBM for access to the formulary.
Well, so there's rebates. The rebates come with increased market share. So you may have two competing drugs for the same, disease state. And so there's literally going to try to outpay each other, outbid each
Okay.
other for that placement of onto a formulary. So it would be rebates, it would be formulary placement fees, market share,
Okay.
bonuses, admin fees. All of those things get paid to the PBM behind the scenes. We don't get to see any of that stuff, right? And so now the drug is on a formulary. So the plan sponsor is the one that pays the bill, right? And so you come to the pharmacy, you get your prescription filled,
So when you say plan sponsor, we're now talking about company again. Let's say our
right? The
UPS
company,
example, the plan
right?
sponsor, the buyer, the purchaser, even if that's the government, the
Well,
purchaser,
yeah, the employer will pay for the plan, pays the monthly fee to the plan. See, it already gets very convoluted, right? There's a whole lot of moving parts. So, yeah, I mean, the employer pays a monthly premium to the plan. Usually the employee will pay 20% for their insurance. The employer pays 80, so that
sure.
all goes to the plan. Hope I'm not confusing the issue here.
No, 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 no. Uh, Not at all. So what we've described there, at least initially, is we went from describing this thing that's like, okay, the company buys an insurance plan from the insurance company, and the insurance company has this pharmacy benefit manager to save everybody money. And then and we go, well, that sounds well and good. That doesn't sound in and of itself disastrous, does it? So then you kind of hopped right on how does that at least become distasteful at some level? We're like, okay, well, now we have this for-profit entity that's trying to get drugs on there, so they're paying each other. But zooming back out to the level of an individual with an insurance card, what logistically, like on a day-to-day basis, here's my card at the pharmacy. Where does this idea, this concept of insurer to PBM, where does that go wrong? Like, does that make sense?
Well, and go wrong for who? So,
The person with the insurance card.
yeah,
Here's
and
my
could it be
yeah.
bad? Could it be bad for the consumer?
Because we could go, hey, Uh, it doesn't sound great to have two big companies doing some sort of get my drug on your formulary, but we could go, hey, there's so many industries where they're scratching each other's back. As long as it doesn't impact the person, Sally Jane is just going into local pharmacy X. How does that mess Sally Jane up?
Sure. Well, so for Sally Jane, sometimes she's required to use mail order. Okay, so
Ah.
she'll have an insurance plan that requires mail order. And that was a PBM negotiated situation because now she's using a mail order pharmacy that the PBM owns. So this is that vertical integration. She's been going to the neighborhood family doctor forever, but now this PBM has another tentacle into her healthcare world too, so she can no longer go to that doctor as a preferred plan either. She has to go to a PBM owned clinic. So it affects the end user in that they no longer have choice. That's one way that it affects the end user.
So while we're talking about these network kind of issues, let's take a specific example. We get this question all the time. Hey, can you send my refill in? But hey, I got to switch pharmacies. They don't take my insurance anymore. Is that the fairest way to say that, or is that just the easiest way for everybody to use language? Because as I understand it, they may have more options than they don't take my insurance anymore. But the question is their insurance plan steering them toward their place where they're vertically integrated, a company that they own? Say, hey, you might as well go ahead and get it filled here because, by the way, we own that thing. Is that is
Mhm.
that fair, or are people not allowed to use certain pharmacies, or is it just more beneficial to the insurance company and the PBM?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to answer that, and they're
Okay.
all they're all can be true. So in one example, they're steered to or forced to use mail order. Um, I say forced, if they can go mail order and have a $0 copay, or they come to me and they have a $50 copay, they're not forced to
I would
use.
agree. There's no force there, but the market incentives, if there is a market,
Right,
is to go to the free one. Sure.
right, of course. So that's one example. It just gets really confusing really fast for the patient. And so they're incentivized to use the company plan, if you will.
The path of least resistance for that individual, if they show up to their local pharmacy and they go, that's going to be $50 here. And you go,
Yep.
it
And
used to
in
be
some
free. It's a old cheap. I'm getting 90-day supply.
That's
Oh,
right.
I did get that I did get that letter in the mail that if I use the mail order, then it should be free.
That's right. And often it's not just a letter in the mail, it's 15 phone calls a
Sure,
week,
sure, sure, sure.
on please switch to us, you should switch to us, we'll make your life easy, blah blah blah. Compliance is so important. Doesn't it get old having to drive? Blah blah blah. We'll just send it right to you. The other thing that happens is we get issued the opportunity to do business with these plans, and the contract is abysmal. So we're getting paid literally nothing. We should really be happy about it, to accept the insurance plan. And so we don't, we
Yeah,
can't.
or I've been on, I've been on the dark corners of pharmacists Twitter. I mean, it's not just the contracts are abysmal. We wouldn't make that much money doing it. It's as I understand it. You tell me, like, are pharmacists and pharmacies dispensing products like at a loss? They're losing
So,
money on scripts?
so I'm really glad you asked that question. You know, it's one thing to say we're not making as much. And it's a whole other thing, which is the reality is that we're often, at least, so I just bought a pharmacy in Damascus, Virginia. 15 to 20% of our claims we sell at a loss. Legitimately, I pay more for the drug than I'm reimbursed. And I'll give you a very good example. And I almost posted this the other day on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, which was like, just for giggles, ask your pharmacist if they're making any money on your GLP-1 drug. So, and I hope I can say this, but we'll just say the shots, okay? So we're not demonetized or, kicked
Sure.
off of social. But the weight loss shot, all right? We pay $1,000 for it. Let's just go round even numbers. Often I'm reimbursed 920. So I have to decide, can I afford the $80 loss to dispense this medication? So I have to look at the patient's profile and maybe their spouse and their whole family and be like, do I make enough to satisfy this? So the problem, and I often say this, independent pharmacies are closing in droves, and it's not because they all of a sudden suck at business. It's because they're literally losing money to fill prescriptions, and which other business in the world does that?
And not and really from my experience talking to patients, not for a lack of anybody wanting to go to a local pharmacy. Every single person here that doesn't come in on my intake forms that says pharmacy of choice, everybody who doesn't fill in that box goes, yeah, what's your local recommendation? I'd love to go to who's the best local, who's the best ma and pa.
That's right.
It's not for a lack of nobody wants to go there. So then you
Right.
go like, well, there's some sort of, which means that there's not a real marketplace. Like if the customers want to go somewhere and they're forced to not go there for monetary reasons, it's not a real market.
Right. That's correct. That's correct. They have their tentacles in, and so it's not forced, but they're forcing.
And I talk about this a lot of times. Like some people would say there is a market because there's five insurance plans or yada yada, and I bought this plan. But let's be honest, most people don't buy their insurance plan. You're not like picking which one you think is best for you. You have a job at the place and they're going to buy the plan that they want to buy. They're going to pay for 80% of it, like you said, or Medicare, Medicaid, government insurance. You don't have a choice either.
That's
So
right.
it's not like, oh, I would choose a different plan if they let me go to my local pharmacy of choice. You don't really have a choice there. So then on the back end, where you're like, I would like to choose where I'd like to get my drugs at, you don't have as many options because you're boxed in.
That's correct. And remember, it's the same three companies that are negotiating the formulary and the rates. So you could have a plan that's called something different, it might have a different name,
Sure.
but the same people are deciding the rules, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think the clearest example of that perhaps is when people go, um, hey, can you send my stuff over to this big pharmacy that starts with C and ends in S because that's where my insurance wants me to go? And you're like, no, no, they're the same thing. They're not telling you you should go there. That'd be better for you. They're saying that because that is their company.
That's right.
That's where they would make the most money.
That's right.
So we've talked about formula. We've talked about money on the back end from the pharmaceutical companies. We've talked about network. We've not talked as much about utilization and like who gets drugs and why and when. But like out of that bucket, if we're to say like which one of these things is either contributing fastest to the decline in local pharmacies, even like to the point like when I say local pharmacies, we live in a geographic region that is t typically designated as underserved. Like there's not a ton of big chain pharmacies in small communities like there used to be as many mom and pop pharmacies. But if we're talking about closures, patients interactions, either from a customer service perspective or financial perspective at the drugstore, like which one of those things do you think in terms of could it be fixed? Which one of those is the biggest problem from
like access to
Formulary,
care.
rebate, networks, utilization, these tactics or techniques, policies of the PBMs. Which one of those is the biggest detriment to giving patients choice and access to pharmacies in their community?
Well, I think vertical integration is would be one thing that I would say needs to go. They shouldn't, I don't think companies should be able to own the entire process, right? Especially when they command 80% of the market share. So then they can dictate where 8 out of 10 people go, or 8 out of 10 healthcare events take place. So I would say that would be, a huge thing. You started off this conversation by talking about can we really explain this? Because they do such a good job of muddying the water where everyone knows that independent pharmacies are failing, that they're having to close their doors. Everyone knows that. Um, there's 51 communities in Virginia that are experience so-called pharmacy deserts. They're literally places where there's not a pharmacy. So, and that didn't just happen. It happened to us. It happened upon them. So you're asking like I think it's the whole shooting match. The plan, the employer isn't they're not bad. Just like you said, I try to offer insurance to my employees, and when I look at the plans, sure, I get to pick three or four or five, but I'm trying to pick the most affordable that's also the best, and we can go down that road too, about the best. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it's all of it. What part of the apple is rotten? The whole apple is rotten. And it's greed, you know. It's not about healthcare anymore. It's about their shareholders.
Yeah, we've certainly talked about the Wall Street versus Main Street component of this. So, gosh, and if anybody was listening to this and go like, it didn't used to be like this. It didn't used to be like this. And I was misinformed to think that this was some sort of new phenomenon or a carve out of, I'm always pointing fingers at the Affordable Care Act as far as granting more power to these um, health groups.
I
But
do think it got demonstrably worse.
you're saying like if we're to be generous and to be fair, like you said, the PBM process, this idea, this notion is not a new concept. So at some level, without becoming overly philosophical or political about it, it really is at the hands of increased market share, a a a a bottom up goes to a top down system that becomes 80% of the market and go like, well, we've got a lot of money sitting around and we might as well see if we can make $1 off of these cheap generic drugs when the mom and pa used to be able to make $4 off of them. Let's take $3 out of that community. And if you run that script long enough, taking $3 out of a community at a time, I wonder why things would close. And that sounds
Right.
kind of, radical to a lot of people, but even being on kind of like the free market end of this, like we part of the reason we do what we do is because there's a marketplace. Like I either provide a product that people like to buy or they don't buy it. And that's our incentive to continue to provide good service at a reasonable price. Like so even when we're talking about like there's not a market, there's so much overregulation. You talked about the collusion, the back scratching, and then at some point you just have to combine and say like, well, this is $1 trillion industry. Like there's really not much who's to take on $1 trillion industry.
Yeah, I mean,
Not the
our
mom and pop pharmacies that are losing money on scripts. There's not that much ammunition in the tank to go at and claw at this.
well, and we're bound by contracts to not mention any of this stuff. We're supposed, like I said, we're supposed to just smile and say thank you so much for the opportunity, and not complain legally. Uh, we band together, of course. all the independent pharmacies have a shared voice, at least against PBMs. And I think our voices are heard. It's just when a bill gets presented, so so a well-meaning legislature person creates a bill, it gets dropped pretty quickly, you
And
know.
Tennessee was trying to do this, weren't they? Like within the last 6 months, trying to put some sort of restrictions or regulations on how Tennessee was going to handle PBMs as far as their Medicaid spending. Was that the situation?
Yeah, that was part of it, and so it's passed, and so everything's groovy until potentially it gets shot down. So I don't pretend to know the inner workings of the government. I just know that I have talked to all of our local senators and local government people, and they all know, and they all say, we try and it gets shot down. We try and it gets shot down. So I think, you know, I would say that every pharmacist that's practiced, I've practiced for about 23, let's see, 24 years now. Um, we all think that things are going to change. That's what, that's kind of like oh man, if we could just get this thing to pass, it's going to
Yes, and they have
change
the
and we're
doctors
going
on
to be
that same
okay.
treadmill. Oh, it's going to get better if we do one thing differently.
It's
It's
going to
it's
have to
all
get
going to start
better.
tipping back in the right direction again. Oh, we're just
Yep.
waiting on it's going to get better. It can't get much worse than this, and then people just keep working in that same
That's right.
system, feeding that same thing.
So if like where I'm at, no one's coming to help us. It's not going to happen. So I want to create programs that we don't deal with PBMs at all. Like you didn't have me on to talk about that, but it takes pharmacists that are good and that care about patients and patient care and running a good program, and it takes us out of the game because we don't want to participate anymore. You know,
Well, it's interesting that you brought up kind of a systems question. So if I've said repeatedly online, the doctors just need to leave. There is no reforming the current system. The only choice is to leave. And if there's no doctors left, they'll have to change the system. I've said plenty of times online that if you have problems with insurance-based healthcare, don't buy insurance. Go uninsured. If everybody that had insurance didn't buy it one year, they'd fix this in about 2 seconds
that's
because they've
right.
got shareholders to answer to. But the problem is there's no real choice. Your employer buys it, the government buys it, yada yada. But if you're talking about systems that potentially could be put in place that is not a remedy, but outside of the system in some ways. The question that came to my mind when we're talking, especially about rural access, it's all about access and equity. The pushback, especially when we opened, and I still think some, as people confuse direct primary care with concierge medicine as some sort of luxury thing. And then my answer to that is we've got patients on good insurance, no insurance, bad insurance, all socioeconomic, like employee, occupations. What I've seen is that if people have been making decisions about their healthcare based on fear of either going to the doctor, how much they're going to pay at the doctor, removing that actually gives them more access and it's more equitable in some way, shape, or form. When I hear this from the pharmacy side, I think the question from the detractors would be like, well, if there's no insurance, well, how would anybody afford their medications? So like since and I know your compounding stuff is specialty products, um, and maybe not all of them, but walk us through what do you think about that when you hear that? I don't necessarily have a question. Uh, are drugs in and of themselves expensive? Is there a way that pharmacies and could the pharmacies can make money and the patients actually wouldn't have to pay that much money for these drugs because they're not that expensive in the first place? Like what does that sound like when we're talking about building systems that exist outside of the current one? What does that look like for people's access and their bottom line as
Yeah,
individuals?
that's a great question. You know, 70, I think it's the figure is like 73% of drug costs are specialty drugs. And these are drugs that are,
Oh, interesting.
five, $10,000 a month drugs, for rheumatoid arthritis and, a lot of autoimmune disease drugs. biologics, if you will. So, given that, the majority of generics, we can easily, pharmacies can easily sell you a 3 month supply for 12 to 15 bucks. A 3 month supply for 12 to 15 bucks, you know, and we do fine at that price. So that does not seem exorbitant to me,
Not to
right?
me.
And so, you know, I would tell you, and we have a cost, what we call a cost plus program. So it's extremely affordable for patients that don't have insurance, and we ha often have patients who have insurance and choose to get it on a cost plus plan because it's actually cheaper. So that's an option. With compounding, we have to have people come back for refills. So we don't, you can skin a sheep one time and you can share it its whole life. So like we have to create pricing models that are really fair for patients because we need them to come back. We need them to be compliant. So with compounding, we keep, copay, the tier of copays used to be what, 10, 25, and 50. If it was like out of network or non-preferred, it was a $50 copay. Almost all of our compounds are less than that, you know. So, and that's cash right out of pocket. So, and then like I said before, your regular drugs, your ACE inhibitors, your statins, your blood pressure meds, 12, 15 bucks for 90 days, you know, $8 for 30 days, something like that. And I mean, in our store, we have, you know, a full, like you said, a full range of socioeconomic backgrounds. So I don't think it's an exorbitant situation to pay for your meds. Now, of course, there's times where a patient may be on a brand name medication that's
Sure.
$600, $500, and that's what they try to get. But the reason those prices are so high is because they have to build in a rebate to the PBM.
Oh, sure.
So,
Yeah.
so they want to get paid what's quote theirs, but they have to inflate the price so that they can pay the rebate. So, I don't know if that answers your
You
question,
brought
but
up
I think it's
something
important.
interesting there. So I have, you know, just because we don't take insurance for primary care doesn't mean that my patients, a lot of them don't have health insurance. And when we're looking at what's the best way for me to become a consumer so I can make the best choices, the best example of this, I think, in the commonplace is I know I can get a CT scan done at this location or that location and get a better price for it. I think that's the one place where people are actively, for whatever reason, I don't know why it's imaging, but people are more aware that they can become a consumer. What is the tip on the pharmacy side of that for people that are looking to um, understand their rights as a person that is engaged with an insurance company? Maybe they know their pharmacist is engaged with an insurance. What is the recourse there for a person to put their consumer hat on and make choices that's best for them? Like, what do they need to know to navigate that world
Yeah,
that you described? I got a cost plus, I got an insure. Like, what do they need to know? What's the best practices there for those folks?
well, I mean, we're a phone call away, and I know that all of my colleagues that are independently owned pharmacies are a phone call away. You could call us and say, I've got a prescription here for, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, but I'll spell it to you,
Sure.
and then we'll quote it, right? I would tell you, and this is no, I'm not trying to, talk
Which
poorly about.
sounds simple, but I can't get through to a real person at some of these big pharmacies anymore.
That's right. And so I'm not,
Even in the voice activated script, if I yell into the phone 17 times, I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor, talk to the pharmacist, I'm not getting through.
that's right. So I would say, and I mean, clearly, I'm a local. I own a locally owned business, so I'm a shop local guy. So, I'm biased that way. I would say that the chains are going to be more expensive. They're going to take longer. It's going to be harder to get in touch with someone. a lot of people who go to chains never get to talk to their pharmacist. And this is nothing against any of the teams at those
Sure.
organizations. They have thousands of scripts to do, 200 vaccines to do. They got to rearrange the diaper aisle, all kinds of different things that they're responsible for. So, but if you want like really good mom and pop type service, like where we're invested in you, like I would be calling an independently owned pharmacy. And obviously that's biased. But I mean, in terms of shopping around, yeah, I mean, just call 3 or 4 pharmacies and we're probably going to be pretty similarly priced. I don't know if that answers your question. I will tell you, I'm not a big fan of the GoodRx program. They will take a percentage of all of that and then they turn around and sell your data that they collect. So most independent pharmacies aren't taking GoodRx. I don't take it, wouldn't take it. And most of the time my prices are better than their prices. So
And that's what I was going to say. I think people, because of television or because of a
sure,
buddy or because of a big office that was busy and the people drop off a stack of cards, like you mentioned, in my experience trying to explain to patients, the price, if you go to goodrx.com and type in your drug, like what you're probably looking at is the price that if you ask for the cash price from your local pharmacist, that's probably what they're going to give it to you anyway. Is that fair?
that's right. And I
It's
mean,
usually like if you go on that website and it says $15 for 90 days, you're probably going to be at $15 90 days cash price. I generally, as I see, as I understand it, the only difference is if you show that card, you're getting this kind of margin erased and plus the data thing that you've mentioned that I didn't know. So that's, I mean, I'm
yeah.
not surprised that somebody's
Well, I
selling
mean,
you
there's a
data,
reason
but
they can afford to do an ad at the Super Bowl. You know, there's a reason that they have that kind of cashola.
interesting. Interesting. I mean, it makes sense. Like all these other apps on your phone that are, free apps or whatever, like the money's in there selling your data to
In the
third
data.
party, advertisers and yada yada, right? So
But I mean, I think then really what we're talking about is patients becoming their own advocate and becoming educated, being educated consumers because it is a consumer market. Um, and there's options for that for sure.
call the local pharmacy and see what they can do for you. That's what it sounds like. Get a quote, get a number, call around. It may not be the path of least resistance. It may be easier, not as easy as just telling the doctor on your way out that you'd like to send it here. You may have to call,
Also,
but
too, and I'll say, like, I recently had to buy tires for my truck. I didn't shop around. I went to the place that I knew they were going to do a great job. They've done a great job before. I went there for value. I went there for service and value, and I want them to make money. I need them to be there the next time I need tires. So it, I think that there's a large percentage of patients, consumers that want value. They want service. They want they want a business to have adequately staffed locations so that they can take care of people. So they're not necessarily going for the bottom of the barrel. Can I get this for pennies? They're like, hey, we need a community. So they're going to shop for value. They're going to shop for service.
well, that's an interesting example because, gosh, let's take, if a tire's $100, the cheapest tire you could find is $80. But if somebody's offering you like, oh, your copay at this thing is, X amount of dollars, but if you send it to this place that we've encouraged you to go because we own it and it's going to be $0 for you, again, that's kind of like putting fingers on the scale a little bit because there's no place you can get a free tire. Does that
That's right.
make sense? Like
Sure.
there has to be some sort of that's where if there is a market, the incentive there is toward the $0 one from the $1 trillion industry that can basically, provide it nearly at a loss. And even if it's 2 cents of a margin, if you run that over and over at scale, then they're still going to come out with a, $25 million, profit or whatever. Not, but so that's an interesting example from a, it's always car examples. That's always my favorite healthcare comp. There's a menu board. You
That's
call,
right.
they tell you what's wrong with it, tell you how much it's going to be before they fix it. If they screw it up, you got to, take it back. If they don't, your car's fixed and you're good to go. It's
Right.
always a car example. Well, Trey, anything else you want to plug? I'll leave you on PBMs. This has been super helpful. We need to get together and do some other
I
topics. I got some short lists, but what do you got to plug before we let you go?
Well, no, I just really appreciate you having me on. I stand behind what all the things that I've said. I could be, I try to be as accurate as I can. Like I said, they try to make the topic about as confusing as possible. So that's the way I understand it to be. These have been my experiences in the industry, and I love taking care of patients. I hate dealing with insurance. So it's that love-hate relationship. I went to pharmacy school to take care of patients and to work within a community, not to deal with insurance day in and day out. But I mean, it is part of the job, so I try to make it as enjoyable as possible.
That's where a lot of healthcare workers are. They love it. They wanted to do it to help people, and it's getting messier and messier, harder to do for less
Yeah,
and less.
I love what you do, and I think that if there's more folks that are like in that same vein of basically proving to people that it is affordable, you know, I haven't had health insurance in a long time, personally. Um, so, because it's not affordable. I
Yeah, me
mean,
neither.
so
So, um, yeah, and we're working on it. People are dropping it. People are looking around, and they're paying cash for stuff. So, as much as dismal as it gets online, and sometimes I feed into that on a couple different channels, but it's not permanent. I mean, and the way out to me is quite clear. It's quite simple, and it's a lot cheerier and brighter on that side of things. So,
that's right.
we'll keep it up. Keep it up. Well,
Awesome.
Trey, you can find Trey at what's your Instagram tag? Waters Wellness.
Waters Wellness. Yeah, that's probably the quickest way to get me is through Instagram or Facebook. If you want to DM me, I'd be happy to help you.
Cool, cool, cool. A lot about hormones and perimenopause.
That's right.
A lot about that stuff on there. A lot of supplement guidance. Trey's your guy. Follow him.
Thanks,
All right,
Doc.
man. Thanks.
Have a great day.